Hello everyone! Today I'm going to try a new type of video that I've never done before on my channel, and I want to react to tweets. But it's not any tweets. As you might know, I'm quite active on Twitter, and the other day, 4 days ago, when I'm recording this video, I asked a question: what was your biggest mistake in language learning? And I received a lot of responses, and I thought it would be interesting for me to react to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the replies. There were really good replies. I really loved some of the contributions, and I hope you will enjoy them, and let's get started. Being afraid of initiating conversation in a language I'm learning. I must confess I haven't done that in a while, but when I had first started I was so scared. I think it's a very common one. It's very normal. I feel like everyone who learns a language goes through that stage at least, you know, at some point or another, and I definitely still go through it now, even in English, which is weird because I'm completely fluent in English, right? But it's absolutely normal, and it's something that you kind of have to accept when you learn a language, because you will always be a non-native speaker and you're not going to be as comfortable in that language as you're in your native language unless you really have a lot of exposure to the language, like me, I guess, with English. In my experience, especially when you're a beginner, it gets quite stressful to talk to someone because you're at a stage where obviously you're not fluent and you can't really form your sentences quickly, for example, and you don't know if your sentence will even make sense because you're such a beginner that you're not 100% sure that people will understand you. But it's part of the journey of learning languages. I started studying languages I was not committed to. That's a very good one, because it's very important, I think, to really know why you're learning the language. And, you know, there's not really a bad reason to learn a language, I don't think, but there are reasons that are going to be more difficult to make it like a habit to learn your language, or at least something enjoyable that you want to go back to regularly. Typically, a lot of the time when students learn languages at school, they are sometimes forced to take a language, and they're not really committed to the language because they didn't really choose to do it. So I definitely think that it's important to really enjoy the language you're trying to learn, and learn it for real reasons. And real reasons is very subjective. It's just reasons that are real to you, that are like genuine reasons, not just like, I mean, I guess for most people learning a language to impress is not going to be a solid reason, although I guess it depends as usual. But I think reasons like, you know, because you want to travel to the country, because you want to live there, you want to watch or read content in that language, can for most people be good reasons, and that will, I think, make the commitment much easier. The lack of consistency. I would have been fluent by now if I just kept up with it. Yeah, there's two interesting things in this one. First of all is the if I had done this, I would have been at this stage by now. It's not really something that I find helpful to think about, because yes, it's true, but you can, I think it's more like a bias that we have, or like not a very productive belief, because in any case you could say, oh, if I had done 10 hours of language learning every day for 10 years, I would have been so fluent in 10,000 languages, you know, that you can go quite far with it, you know. So I think it's just about accepting that, you know, you weren't maybe in a place to do your language learning then. Maybe you are more now, and you can always sort of, you know, fix it. You know, what you didn't do before, you can do now. It's never too late. And as for the lack of consistency, yes, I think it's very important. I think regardless of how many minutes or hours you spend every day learning a language, I think what's important is to do practice or learn every day. I mean, if you have a 1 day break, it's not the end of the world, but the idea is to be really consistent, because if you stop, you know, being regular about something, not just languages but anything, then you will lose the habit, and then getting back to it is going to be much more difficult. Not to talk until I felt ready. I thought there will be a moment of enlightenment. One day I will wake up and feel ready, then talk. If I had started with the vocabulary I had, I would have spoken much earlier. Confidence is the key. Yeah, that's a very good one. A lot of people, and me included, I'm not so much different from you guys. We all think there's going to be a time when everything is easier, better, I don't know, like stars will align themselves and everything will be perfect, but there is never a time like this. And yes, some of you might say, yeah, there will be, you know, I will have more free time, etc., etc. But it's not really useful to think like this, because you never know, you know, you can't predict the future. So it's better to focus with what you have now and work with what you have. And then yes, if in the future something gets easier or your circumstances make it easier for you to learn languages, then good for you. But it might be that it won't happen, and then what excuse will you find yourself then? You know, I'm not judging, we all have been there, but it's important to not give yourself excuses not to do something. If your excuse is that you don't enjoy doing something, that's one thing, but don't give yourself the excuse that it's not a good enough time now, because that's not true. You can make it a good time, but you have to sort of put in the effort. At least that's how I see it. Being a little too shy initially, it can take a lot of courage to open your mouth and actually speak to natives. It's kind of similar to the tweet we just read before. Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of courage to speak a language that you're not comfortable in, or at least that is not your native language, because you're scared of judgment, of making mistakes and all that stuff. And the only thing I could say is that it's something that you practice. The more you do it, the less conscious or self-conscious you are about your target language. And yeah, it's only about practice. The first few times it's quite uncomfortable, but then the more you do it, the easier it gets. There's no real hack, I think, for this one. Relying on Duolingo. I know typically Duolingo gets a lot of crap from lots of people. I don't really have an opinion on Duolingo. I think it's fine, you know, whatever you enjoy. But I would make this reply maybe a bit more general and talk about apps in general. So I wouldn't rely on any app ever. I think apps are a nice aid. They can help you, you know, learn a few words or practice what you've learned. But I really never think they should be the only thing you do, or at least not long term anyway. So for example, for a short amount of time, if apps is the only thing you have time for, then sure, it's better than nothing, but it really shouldn't be the only thing you do. I always sort of promote diversity in the resources you use, because I think, you know, if you do lots of different things, then all the weaknesses of each thing will sort of be cancelled out by the others. I hope that makes sense. I didn't learn about grammar from the start. Yes, this is the big one, and I think there's two extremes to this. So some people will think that studying grammar is the best way to learn a language, and others think that we should favor things like immersion or learning naturally, so to speak. I kind of feel like a balance of the two is nice. You don't necessarily have to spend you know, all your time doing grammar, but I think doing a bit of grammar, but really sort of have it sort of supplement practice, or practice supplementing grammar rather, is good, is great. I think that's the best way to do it, because you want to mix the theory and the practice together. That's how I sort of approach it personally. Not taking lessons could have benefited a lot from native pronunciation practice and overall structure when learning. This was an interesting one. A lot of people say that you can learn languages for free, and I think to some extent, yes, you can. Lots of people have done it. My dad came to France and never took French lessons, and he speaks fluent French. So it is possible. I do think though that having some language lessons can be quite useful, because it's like for any skill. You can learn any skill off the internet, off a book, but I think having someone correcting you or guiding you a little bit, giving you a bit of structure, like Matthew said, can be very useful, because that means that if you make mistakes, they can get corrected as early as possible before they become fossilized. So I don't think you have to take language lessons, and it depends on your objectives. Some people don't really care about having perfect, you know, learning perfectly. But I think if you really want to study for things like exams or to work one day in the country, I think it can be good to have some lessons. And how many lessons really depends on you and the money you have available. But I think having some lessons every now and then is quite useful. Not starting earlier. Yes, this one is a classic, I guess, because we always, it's kind of this similar to the tweet I commented on earlier. We sometimes tend to delay things because we think there's going to be a better time. And I think there's no better time than now, or but now, I can't remember the exact quote. But yeah, just start now, don't wait. There's no point in waiting. Not keeping up with German over the last 15 years. Now my daughter has a German boyfriend. Well, it is what it is. Like, I'm guilty of it as well. I've learned Italian about 10 years ago, I think, 11 years ago, and I forgot a lot of it. I can still understand it, but I can't really produce it so comfortably. I can still say some things, but I'm going to be very rusty. And that's the thing about languages. If you don't keep it up, then you end up forgetting. And the less you practice, the more you forget. And it's a vicious cycle, essentially. And let's do a last one. Translating word for word the phrasing in my own language just didn't work. Also writing the pronunciation of words as I heard it. That meant struggling with real spelling later. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of things to unpack here. I think it's definitely important not to fall into the trap of translating word by word or always finding an exact equivalent, or at least like a literal equivalent, I mean, because certain languages, especially if they are from different families of languages, so imagine French and English, for example, they're not that far, but they're still pretty different. But the difference gets bigger if you compare English and Japanese, for example. And in this case, it's important to really keep an open mind and not assume that there's always a direct equivalent to what you want to say, let's say in English, in Japanese, for example. That's why when things are translated, like in textbooks, for example, I like when the translation is not necessarily natural in the native language or English, when I'm studying Japanese, but that it reflects how it's said in Japanese. So I don't have an example off the top of my head, but for example, you know, if it gives the word order, that's quite useful, or if it explains how it's expressed. For example, in Japanese, I came across this particular sort of concept to express, which is I wish, you know, I wish I could go. What they say in Japanese, if I remember correctly, is it would be good if, or it would be good, essentially. So it's not the same way of saying it, but it's important to sort of kind of have that in mind, that, you know, different languages will not express the same thing exactly the same way. And it might not even be exactly what you want to say, but that's sometimes the only way to say it. And yeah, you have to accept it. And then in terms of writing the pronunciation of words, as a teacher myself, I never encourage my students to use English to transcribe French, because it's just a different set of sounds. Like French and English in terms of pronunciation are very different. In terms of vocab and grammar, there are some similarities, especially vocab, of course, but in terms of spelling, it's completely different. What I would advise is instead listen to native speakers if you have some some around you, like people that can help you, or just use pronunciation dictionaries. Some are pretty good with the pronunciation, but I would avoid at all costs trying to transcribe, especially if you're not using IPA, like official phonetic alphabet, because this one at least is accurate. But if you use sort of English sounds to pronounce French, then your accent is going to sound not great. And it might be even hard to understand you because you're using sounds that are not, that don't exist in French, for example. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was fun. Let me know what you thought. If you enjoy it, I might do more. If not, then maybe I'll still do more, but we'll see, I guess. And on this note, I will see you next week. Bye!